Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation finds you. I am Travis Gray, and today we are transforming with our guest, Dr. Jorge Ferrer. I am so excited for this guest to have. This is a prolific scholar in the field of transpersonal psychology. I am unbelievably impressed by how much this man has been able to impact the field of transpersonal psychology. He has done this through his work in the participatory approach, the participatory theory and application, embodied work. He is the author of Revisioning Transpersonal Theory, a participation theory of human spirituality, and a collection of transpersonal essays that I have with me in Psychology, Education, and Religion. So this is Participation and the Mystery. And then another latest publication called Love and Freedom, Transcending Monogamy and Polyamory. So he's done incredible work in the field, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with you, Jorge. How are you?
Thank you, Travis. It's a pleasure to be here. It took some time for us to come together, so very happy that we made it.
Yeah, we did make it. We had to go through the obstacles. We had a small hero's journey just getting this I'm happy to do it with you. So Jorge, you have made such an incredible impact on this field, and that has been through the very first book that I read of yours. This was a required read in my bachelor's completion program. I think you may know the instructor that I had at the time, Dr. Nick Walker. He's now Dr. Nick Walker, and so he I think it was a required read in one of his courses, which was this revisioning transpersonal theory, taking it from the experiential approach. That it seems like in the classroom there's this experiential thing, and I am particularly interested in how this is applied. But before we get into that, how did you end up pushing the limits of what transpersonal psychology already was, and looking at the beyond the edge to look at the participatory approach? And how did you get into this work? How did your journey begin?
Okay, I'll try to be succinct. It's a long story, of course, but I would say that, like, my interest in transpersonal psychology and spirituality in general was catalyzed by early childhood experiences. I'll not go into detail, but I had like what is called kind of absorptions when I was in the classroom, in which like suddenly I would be with my eyes open, and the world around me would disappear. It would be just like white light, and would be in a space of like tremendous peace and joy. And then, of course, some children or the professor would wake me up, and I would break up crying because I was, and then at some point, they thought I could have like epilepsy, that they were concerned that there were epileptic spells, understandably. So they took me to the psychologist, and I didn't have any symptoms of epilepsy. And that stays with me. I was pretty young. And then later in my pre-adolescent, I started having out-of-body experiences that at some point was very scary for me. I didn't have the understandings. I was like, what the fuck? Maybe I'm dying, typical. Yeah. And only much later, when I read some of the accounts, I realized like, wow, this is exactly phenomenologically, exactly what I was experiencing, like the energy wave, and then suddenly you're out, and the whole thing. So I think that those kind of experiences, anomalous experiences, plus my awareness when I was already like 16, 17, of kind of neurosis, blockages in my energy, in my sexuality. All those two things led me to study psychology. Like I was looking for healing and understanding when we study psychology. And I think that many people who feel drawn to psychology, or deep down, there is some attempt at healing. So, of course, mainstream psychology at Barcelona was dominated by university psychology, by more cognitive, like a scientific paradigm, neuroscience, psychometrics, statistics, So it was pretty disappointing, like for me, and as well as for most of the students who came there the first year. It was very disillusionment. And then at the very first year, I started looking like for different forms of psychology at the library. So it took me many years. I was reading like Freud and then Eric Fromm. There was this book, Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis. I got into contact with Buddhism. I found it fascinating. And then little by little, I found the first edition of Paths Beyond Ego by Roger Walsh and Frances Vaughan, translated into Spanish in the library. And when I found that book, it was a collection of essays on transpersonal psychology, the first collection of essays ever. I was like, oh my God, this is the psychology that I've been searching for. This psychology with soul, this psychology of depth, a psychology that is not pathologizing this sense of consciousness, is situating them in a way that kind of makes sense to my experience. So that was kind of like the main, and then of course it took me, I did my own studies. I was doing like the mainstream studies at the university, and on my own, I was doing my own studies like transpersonal psychology, shamanism, Eastern traditions, and so forth. But it took me many years until I got like a fellowship from Cultural Foundation in Spain to get CIS to study a PhD. I was doing another PhD in Barcelona. I dropped it to just go into CIS in the early 90s. And I arrived there in the early 90s. I was the same year, 1993, that Stanislav Grof and Richard Turner came to teach at CIS. So for me, it was like this, like synchronicities, like, wow, I knew about Stanislav Grof, and the fact that he was coming to teach there at the same time was amazing, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a little of the starting. In terms of like the impact of my work, like fast forwarding a little, I would say that when I arrived to the Bay Area of San Francisco, like both transpersonal psychology, but also kind of like mainstream spiritual culture, were kind of dominated by this kind of hierarchical models, like universal sequences, especially influenced by Wilber, to less extent by Grof, but by other authors as well, in which people would kind of like, situate themselves, okay, I'm in the psychic stage, or I'm in the subtle stage, and I need to go into the causal and the non-dual, would situate themselves in this kind of pre-arranged hierarchy of the spiritual states and traditions. And I found that like completely ideological. I found like, why in the world we put like non-dual over like theistic mysticism of union with God. And of course, I was also studying a lot of religious studies of comparative mysticism by that time. And I realized that those hierarchies have been done for centuries by mystics of all sorts walks of life, especially in India and Buddhism, and normally always they would put their tradition in the top, and then they would sit with rival traditions at lower stages of realization or understanding. And I realized, like, what the fuck? Like, what the hell? Like, transpersonal psychologists are doing the same now, something that is like completely discredited in religious studies. Everybody sees through that move, And then the last thing I would say is that it had like a practical impact. I'm a spiritual pragmatist. So the reason why I rebel more strongly towards those frameworks is because I had like therapist friends who had internalized those models. And then when they were kind of guiding psychospiritual their clients, they were kind of implicitly or explicitly imposing those models in the assessment of where those clients were at and where they had to go. And that for me was very dangerous because it's not really allowing the conditions for the organic emergence of the spiritual individuation of each person. So it had practical consequences. And of course, last thing, had a lot of practical consequences in the way people would relate to each other from different traditions. Of course, as we all know now, many traditions felt marginalized by Ken Wilber schemes, like pagan traditions, shamanic indigenous traditions, like esoteric traditions that wouldn't qualify into those kind of third-tier, non-dual thing because they were not looking for those states. They were practicing a different game. And so anyway, that's how I did a bit of the climate. And I think why my work, the constructing those hierarchies and offering a more pluralistic understanding of spirituality, but also that holds grounds for critical discernment, I think really hit the spot for many people.
Yeah, it is a beautiful offering to the field to be more inclusive in this way. I did read your critique of Wilbur's work in the Participation and Mystery book of essays, and it is fucked up. It's fucked up. They don't have the same goals. They're not looking into their spiritual practice for the same end goal that some of these other traditions are. And then it becomes my practice, my way of getting to this non-dual state is the way to get to this non-dual state. And there's been incredible work. This is very much aligned with what I'm inquiring about through my dissertation work, and the current kind of status of where this Wilbur's ideas have gone in the non-dual states is this non-symbolic experience. What are your thoughts on the non-symbolic consciousness, or what are your thoughts on some of that? What's the participant?
Could you elaborate more? What does it mean for you?
I don't know if you remember at the Asilomar conference, there was a presenter. His name is Dr. Jeffrey Martin. If you're familiar with his work.
I know him, but I'm not super familiar, but yes.
Okay, so his work is based in the persistent non-symbolic experience. Some of his teachers were Wilbur, and there's another gentleman that wrote a lot about consciousness, and I wish I was in my library because look to the name. So they were speaking about the persistent non-symbolic experience, and my work right now is looking into agency of the individual and the individual's self-becomingness, that they could have an influence on their own transformative place in the world, that they could choose a practice of their own volition and move in that direction. Whereas some of the determinist ideology would say that a person is not transforming of their own accord, but rather because they fell in by external influences. But is there an agent within them that has a part to play there? So I'm kind of looking into that. But the work that Dr. Martin did was looking at persistent non-symbolic experience. So he has these stages. It is in hierarchical measures, but they're planes of understanding this non-dual state, that some non-dual states are a little bit more non-dual than others. And at some fundamental level, agency is gone. And so I even have another colleague that is interested in this no self existence, this non-identity existence that is the true enlightenment. So what is the participatory all of that?
Okay. You gave me a lot to mull over here. So that's great. Thanks so much. I would say three things, like if by non-symbolic experience we understand like an experience somehow of pure consciousness, is that what you mean? Like there is no symbol, there's no content, symbolic content, either verbal or non-verbal. Is that our
Yes, like this is the enlightenment. The enlightenment is the experience of persisting non-symbolic consciousness, awareness.
Yeah. Well, yes. That's the thing, is like pure consciousness has been like been the goal of some traditions, but not all of them. And actually different traditions situate pure consciousness in different steps in their own particular hierarchies. I'll give you an example. In a way we could say like in the tradition of yoga, the earlier yoga, it was the isolation of consciousness, from all contents of consciousness, leading to this kind of like pure consciousness experience. In some Hindu traditions also you can have that goal there, but for example, when you go to the Christian tradition, it's not that they don't have that experience, it's that they value it different. Like for certain trends in Christian mysticism, that particular experience of pure consciousness is not an experience of the ultimate. It's not an experience of the ultimate reality or even the divine or the goal. It's that experience of the soul. And that's an experience that they consider to be like a step, except the purification of the soul. One really like have that experience of pure soul, pure conscious experience as a step to enter into a more participatory connection with the divine. And so different traditions would value this in different ways. I know very few shamanic traditions that they would talk about non-dual states because they are in a different business. That means that they are like the fall short. I don't think so, it's like all Christians when they would say like, oh yeah, Buddhism is beautiful, but they fall short because they don't have an understanding of God. Well, just the problem, right? But then this gets complicated further because when we talk about non-duality, we tend to, in the spiritual, mainstream spiritual discourse, I know that there's people making more nuances, to talk about if it was like just one single experience, and I think there are different experiences of non-duality. The non-duality of Atman Brahman is very, very likely very different experientially that to experience the non-dual of the Pratriya Samutpada, in which everything is interconnected to each other, or other Buddhist non-dualities, no? And it's probably different that to get in a non-dual experience with a loving God that is really loving you and just has like all this love there as well, So I would say that like there's a variety when you study like mysticism and the mystics and their experiences, you realize, wow, there is actually a variety of non-dual experiences themselves,
Yeah.
So, and then the last thing about the no self, I think that the no self, I think there is a lot of confusion here, like in my understanding, like, I love that, I don't know if you read that great paper by Jack Engler in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology on having no self, I think it was called, or something like this. And he became famous for this sentence, like, before you can be nobody, you have to be somebody, okay? Before you can be nobody, you can be somebody. And it fits also with the Sufi saying, proverb, like, that the Sufis would say, like, just surrender your ego to God, but make sure it's a strong one. Otherwise, you're going to be like annihilated, like a fragmented psychotic, like a strong ego to encounter that force, And then Jack Engler and other people make this distinction that I think is very important between the functional aspect of the ego system, self system, and the representation aspect. The representation is like the identification with the concept of me as an individual entity, I, me, mine. And that's where the traditions are trying to neutralize, to minimize, to go into the no self. But I would say that like a solid spiritual path also involves to strengthen the functional ego, because it's what allows us to metabolize difficult experiences, what allows us to have a reality testing, being rooted in what's real and not, not going psychotic into realms of consciousness, and what allows us to be grounded, and like also have a healthy social identity in the world. So I think that I know I've been rambling in different directions from your great comments, but I think this is we're gonna flow like this, no? Sounds
totally aligned with what you're saying, and it is making the spirituality practical, making it workable for your real everyday life, because you do have an identity, you do live in this world. This is a world. So this kind of begs a question that I've had about non-duality. And for me, my last name is Gray. I'm Mr. Gray. So I've already like built this narrative in. Travis is it's the tax that you give to travel. It's a travel tax. It's like Travis, you can cross the bridge. So that's all built into my narrative just by my namesake. But the non-dual for me has always seemed like more accurate, more pragmatic, more practical, more usable in my life, in other people's lives, if it is a weaving of the dual together, rather than I must only see it without, the only seeing it without ego is not actually non-dual. That's sort of a spiritual bypass to your everyday life.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I would add, like, I mean, I totally agree, like, and resonate, like, I mean, that's where my spiritual pragmatists come in. Like, for me, it's not as important if people, I mean, for some people, non-dual and non-dual path is what was going to make the trick for them, to to surrender more that kind of sense of self-centeredness into the greater mystery and live a life more open to others. But for others, could be like psychedelic shamanism or hugging trees or being conscious parents. And for me, it's like the fruits, like are people becoming more available.
This is a great time to let the tribe know about the Gray Transforms website, graytransforms.com. This is a great place to go to check out all the links to the podcast. It's a great place to support the podcast, to support the channel. You can get a Gray Transforms t-shirt with a transegoic gnosis symbol for transformation on the back. You can get a Gray Transforms bullet journal. This is a simple tool, but this is a tool for mastery. You can get stickers. You can get a Gray Transforms mug. So you can drink great tea in your Gray Transforms mug while you are taking notes in your Gray Transforms bullet journal, while you are listening to high-level transformative conversations on the Gray Transforms podcast. So comment, like, share, subscribe, follow, and together this tribe is moving humanity forward. Let's get back to this conversation.
That's good. Okay, we're on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that little piece that we've already discussed a little bit of. We're doing part 2 because of connectivity, but we're pivoting. We're making it happen, and it is just really incredible how this participatory approach is. It's sort of more integral than what Wilbur is already doing, because it is integrating more aspects. It's more pluralistic, and I really appreciated it since I originally used it. How do you apply this in areas like the classroom? I did a workshop with you in Asilomar in 2019.
Oh,
could you tell us about your embodiment practices, things like that?
Sure. Yes, it's all connected because normally I speak about participation in terms of co-creation, types of co-creation, like intrapersonal co-creation, like co-creation of all of parts of who we are, our bodies, our instinct, and our heart, mind, consciousness, with their own idiosyncratic intelligences and languages, and of course, like different cultures within us, no? So, and also interpersonal, we're always in relatedness with others, with the world, with nature, with archetypal forces and entities, whatever, and then transpersonal co-creation, that's the more controversial for some scholars or some practitioners, that we're co-creating with the creative mystery itself. So the creative mystery is also like unfolding, it's kind of like changing, it's kind of evolving even through human participatory inquiry. So yeah, I mean, I found applications in different ways, of course, like this vision of a spiritual pluralism in which people from different traditions can understand each other, not are better or worse or higher or lower or superior as wholes, but that they can be teachers and students, no? They can teach something, but also they can learn something. So we have applied this sometimes in interreligious dialogue with some success, because there is a lot of like exclusivism and a lot of like conviction that what I call a spiritual narcissism, not to be confused with narcissistic personality. I always make the example of the Dalai Lama. Very likely one of the persons that would score very, very low in any inventory of narcissistic personality created in the West, very, very low. And he's a staunch believer that his particular school of Tibetan Buddhism, the Gelugpa school, has an understanding of emptiness that not even the other Tibetan schools have. And that ultimately, through different reincarnations, all human beings will get it and will accept that truth. You see, it's a very pandemic problem, So, but anyway, coming back to second part of your question of how applications of this in the classroom, right, and embodiment work, that's very important. Like, I think this has to do with both the 3 forms of spiritual co-creation, no? Because I mean, I have different ways to incorporate participatory knowing into the classroom. from classes that are still have a strong cognitive component, like comparative mysticism, in which people need to understand the different theories of mysticism, different approaches to compare them, you know, like constructivist, traditionalist, perennialist, all that, feminist, and but even there, you know, there are many ways to really bring like not just your minds into a study. This is the key. Even at places like Sofia at CIS, you know, like in which there is a lot of practice like Tai Chi Chuan or like yoga and meditation. Normally it happens at the beginning and at the end, but the inquiry process, the teaching, everything is still driven by the mind. And in general, with some exceptions, you know. So that's what I call a bricolage approach to integral education. So what I experimented for more than a decade at CIS is like, well, what if we really bring all of who we are to the inquiry process, you know? And we do that also with somatic practices in which people really like respectfully like make contact with different chakra systems, like different areas of the body, connected geographically in the body with different force of knowing, like instinctive in the hara and here heart, emotional knowledge, and so forth, you know. And then we'll collaboratively come together to a question, a spiritual question, or something we really want to study together. And then during those meditations, we also raise those questions. And then there will be a process of like construction of knowledge, even verbal knowledge from the multidimensional experience through drawing, through poetry, until finally like something also gets more clear for the mind and puts it out there. Beautiful process. We have published like 3 or 4 reports in different journals, some of their mainstream educational journals, and also handbooks of contemplative inquiry. So it's still ongoing, that work, even though I don't teach it anymore at university level, you know. So that's part of the way. And of course, that's kind of in the context of more inquiry and education. But that kind of work, as you experience in Asilomar, can also be applied. And I do that in workshops here in Spain and in when I travel for the integral transformation of the person, because we all came as adults, more or less mature in our minds, because all education was to our minds, right? I mean, the kindergarten was very integral education. When we're in the kindergarten, we dance, we play, we paint, you know. But then as soon as you move to a school and universities, like everything is more in the head, you know, in the mind, you know. Yeah. So basically, like when you, through this kind of work, I call it somatic awakening or embodied spirituality or different names, participants learn like to really reawaken the cognitive power of the instinct and the heart and the body as organs of knowledge, you know, so that they can sit together with the mind in the same table as equals in the co-creation of your life and your spiritual life. So that's some of the ways.
That's amazing. It's so different, and so it's so clearly it has clear implications that are more fundamentally impactful to everyone that is participating in that practice than this sort of like lecture hall styled classroom where, you know, it's just a PowerPoint and you're expecting that the teacher has all answers to all questions. And so it's just involving everyone and every piece of you so much more. It's that is a beautiful thing.
And what a pressure for us poor teachers. We need to know everything. It's like, are you crazy? We don't know everything. No one knows everything. And sometimes people will ask a question, what year this mystic was born? It's like, I didn't memorize that, but there is like, that's why you go to encyclopedias and stuff. But anyway, of course, like I see the role of the teachers, of course, a dimension of like being a resource of knowledge. So there is some of that, you know. There is a way when you're teaching something, you normally know more than most of the students that they've signed with you, you know. So but that's not just to indoctrinate them or just to lecture them down, like this is what it is, but to give them like resources so that they can develop their own interest, they can develop their own line of inquiry, you know. And then the other, even more important dimension, we are facilitators of inquiry, especially in graduate education. I mean, I think there is a way in which at other educational levels, more content and could be more foundational. And when you move to, you know, master and PhD programs, it's like adult people needing to inquire, to really find their own truth, their own voices in the conversation with all the resources and the dialogue with people. So I see myself as a facilitator of inquiry more than like a teacher lecturing students. Like I hate that.
That's amazing. Finding a way to help students find their own line of inquiry, you're helping them become you're as powerful as the questions that you're asking.
Exactly.
That's what you're getting out of that classroom. What questions are you asking, and what parts of yourself are you asking these questions?
Exactly.
Who are you asking? Are you asking just that one person, the teacher, or are you asking your other co-participants in this learning space? So that's really incredible. So you as a prolific scholar in this field, and having really done a lot of work around this participatory approach and application and embodied learning, well, how do you remember these things? What is your process like? What kind of advice would you have for budding transpersonal scholars? A lot of the students that would be watching this in this audience are going to be young transpersonal scholars looking to enter the professional field. And so how do they stay on top of their game so that they, I'm interested in your process and your habits, how are you successful in your writing in these ways?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I would say like I can say a lot about this, but I would say a few things here in this context. One is like, for me, writing itself is inquiry. It's inquiry. So some people think, oh, I need to have everything figured out in my mind before I write it down. No, that's one of the worst assumptions you can have. You can get stuck over and over again. Procrastination will follow. You are going to get in loops that are not very constructive. But if you realize that the writing itself, writing about something, of course, you need to get some pre-knowledge. That Calvin and Hobbes cartooning was like, how stupid Hobbes there. They give me this homework in school to write about bats, And then that was Calvin, and then Hobbes says, well, then you probably need to study some about bats, in order to get it. And it's like, well, what? So I'm going to study about bats and then write about bats? Are you crazy? So anyway, you need to have some knowledge around the topic, and that's why there is you do the readings, and then you start kind of. So that's one thing, but the other thing is also, I would say, very important to honor the gestation process in the creative process. I work with a paradigm of the 4 seasons in the creative process that we apply to academia, like also to university level. And one of the things that we realize is that most students are also, because of the way the programs are structured and the pressures from the academia, is like, you have to read and read and read and read and read and read, and then you have to produce, a paper, And it's like, well, where is the gestation time? When you read, you're incorporating a lot of information, and for a creative process to advance well, according to the most, organic, biomimetic, it needs a process of gestation, like more feminine, quotation marks in some way, to gestate the materials. You stop reading for a while. And then you honor that all that knowledge is going to be kind of getting in contact with your unconscious source of wisdom, and also source of wisdom of earth, and this is where the transpersonal comes in as well, because when you do this kind of more honoring the gestation, the winter, in the creative process, like it's like the seed, the garden and the seed is inside the soil, and that's where it gets rooted and gets all the nutrients from the soil, from the earth. Same with this, but with the nutrients from the collective unconscious and other places, So that's very important, and then come out and share your ideas with others. And then at some point, like, okay, these are the rape fruits. You recognize what are the rape fruits from all these ideas that came from the gestation, and you took it and then you develop and write that, But in a way, like what I would say is like the very structure of academia has this kind of patriarchal ethos, in the sense that it kind of privileges the more masculine, big quotation marks, like reading, and then producing, right? And the decisions that are more about gestation and birthing of development, more feminine, at least biologically speaking, then they are marginalized. So that's really important.
Wow, that is never brought up in any kind of coursework that I've been a part of, this gestation process. How are you digesting all of this information? So I've been in school since 2013. I've been in the field of transpersonal psychology ongoingly 4 quarters a year for now going on my 9th year. So this is 4 quarters of year back to back, 10-week quarters. It's just classes and classes and classes and classes. And it's sold as, well, this is really helpful because you'll get through it really fast. But are we trying to get through it really fast, or are we trying to develop our own capacity to acquire in ways that align with us?
Exactly.
So that is an incredible piece. It's very important that just
but that's the tricky part, because of course, you also want to get ahead with your work and dissertation sooner than later, because you want to go on with your life and don't accumulate student debt. Of course, education should be free, should be paid by American taxes, like in most European countries and Spain. It's crazy, the American system in that regard, that is so expensive, and students get into these loans, debts. Well, I'll not go there, but that puts a lot of pressure for people to get through their studies soon, and then there is not much time for these other dimensions. In a more enlightened society, people will graduate in different, some people will be 2 years, some people will 5 years or 7 years, depending on their organic process. We have a different kind of education.
It's very interesting, and I think a lot of students just they're not taught, they just have to find it on their own, but they're not taught the skills to be good students, to be great students. No one is teaching. There's no basic courses on be a student 101, be it like here, these habits here, this is a great way to organize your information. Let's spend a week, let's spend some time on learning how to organize our information. But we just kind of, there's kind of an expectation in scholarship that the talent of the individual is going to be enough for them to figure out how to be a student on their own. Just the natural talents is going to be good enough for them to get through. And like everything else in scholarship, it's a built skill. So
exactly. I used to teach a course at CIS called Theoretical Research in the Human Sciences for PhD students, and unpacking the different logics of inquiry that are more theoretical, not qualitative and quantitative. And I included a lot of that, when teaching students for, public speaking tips, different ways you can speak, different tips. Students love that, because there's things that they don't get anywhere, So I'm totally with you.
Yep, for sure. So I also want to, I had already had this on my radar because I read an article that you did on monogamy, polyamory, and beyond. So this was on my radar before this book came out, Love and Freedom. So your most recent publication, Transcending Monogamy and Polyamory, and then you developed a term, novogamy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but novogamy, novogamy. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that is and some things about that?
Yes. Well, I'll just say quickly that at most of my books, there's at most of the books, I would say, of most people I know in the humanities and transpersonal stuff is rooted biographically, so I'm not going into details, but in my own adult life, I experienced periods of being poly, especially in Bay Area and California for a decade. And then I went into a period of romantic sexual celibacy for 3 years. And then I was called to explore monogamy again anyway, at some point I realized, I can be monogamous or polyamorous without serious fears of conflicts. And it depends on the cards that life threw at me, and also the developmental factors, pools, mine, and the people I'm relating to, and many other things. So I start feeling myself, I wouldn't identify myself with being mono or poly. And also at the same time, I would witness what I call the monopoly wars, like this kind of predicament of mutual condescending and judgment between mono people and poly people. We're talking a bit before, and I realized, like this is very ideological. I did the research, of course, and those judgments, they don't hold, they are not evidence-based. So it's very ideological in that way. And then, and at some point I realized, like, I started coming across more and more people that they were feeling increasingly oppressed by these questions. Are you monogamous or polyamorous? Because in this white and black world that we live, you are either or. And it's even worse if you have been poly once, if you deviated from monocentrism, the scarlet letter, the stigma stays with you forever. Even after 10 years living monogamous relationship, some close friends, they would describe me, oh, Jorge's polyamorous. You see, so that's where it came from. So I started mapping out a variety of ways in which people can really deconstruct and live intimate relationship beyond the binary, in the same way that the transgender movement did with gender. Consider that even 10, 15 years ago, for most people, there were no option, male or female. Now transgender individuals and the movement taught us there are so many ways to be in between, beyond, both, So the same with monopoly, like can just have a few examples. Is it okay? Examples so people get it, like, for example, I already mentioned developmentally at different moments of my life, I can be monogamous or polyamorous, and there's not a universal sequence. Some people start mono and poly, vice versa, some things spiral and so forth, But also, like, for some couples, like they are monogamous at home, but then they go to Burning Man Festival or certain places, and then they are poly. Are they mono or poly? Depends on where they are, And also, like, I always bring this example of our inner diversity. We were talking, you and I, before, like, when this citation of Walt Whitman, right? You say I contradict myself. Yes, I do. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes, and it's true. Like, for many people, they believe in monogamy. They think it's the way to go in their hearts also. But sexually, they want sexual diversity. They are very poly. But also the other way around. I know a poly activist, someone who researches and writes books on polyamory. And she told me, like, and she has written this in her books, it's like, I believe in polyamory. I think it's emancipatory for women. I think it's really, really good. But when I mate sexually, I just cannot be with one man, So it's a tremendous variety, or transcending into a new identity, like the transgender, like, and that's where monogamy comes in, a different term, and could be another term or no term at all. But you transcend that into a different existential identity that is kind of like a hybrid or even beyond that kind of like mental categories, As you know from the book, there are many, many other examples. I'll just give you one fun for the transpersonal audience, and that's the one of the subtle path, in which people can relate also to subtle entities, more and more people with ayahuasca. It's also many traditional shamans. They used to be married with entities, spirit marriage. This great book just came out by Megan Rose, a student of CIS. I was working with her in her dissertation, spirit marriage, but also, avatars in virtual reality. Some people are very monogamous here in this natural social world, and in that world they are super poly, and they encounter a lot of women, romantic walks, and erotic conversation, And the last example I'll just give is like, in terms of the subtle path, this professor, a friend of mine at CIS, was an expert in dreams, and he was a lucid dreamer. And his new wife, was a lucid dreamer as well, So they both have had sexual encounters in the dream world intentionally in the past. So they had to discuss, does our monogamous vow extend to the dream world? And one of them say yes, the other say, they had to attend couple therapy. So you see, the world today is like really complex, and the monopoly binary doesn't capture, the question,
Yeah. What are some? This has been these relationship dynamics. It's always popular interest because relationships are some of the hardest. This is maybe the hardest thing in the world is relationships.
Right.
Like the most difficult, challenging thing. All of your stuff, all of your shadows are brought up in relationships, and vice versa. And so
Right.
it's some of the most challenging work. And so this has been really popular recently. There are people that have kind of spoken in ways that have been judged as patriarchal, thinking of it as very masculine centric. But what are some of the challenges or limitations of the conventional relationship dynamics? What are some of the ways that this gets in people's way?
Yes. I mean, I would say like even what I would call post-patriarchal couples, men and women who are together and they have gone through their feminist inside revolution, they have gone through the awakening of like trying to do things differently. They still like we need to be very compassionate with ourselves and others in the sense that we carry millennia, probably hundreds of thousands of years of patriarchal relationships, co-created also by women and men. I'm not victimizing women. I think there were some ways in which those relationships probably were serving an evolutionary purpose in certain moments in life. But now, of course, they don't, So that's a challenge, like, it's like the dragon that never sleeps, we need to be very aware always, like, when that little joke that we make, it's like patriarchal. And of course, also we need to be a bit relaxed because also it can go the other way around and become like this fascism, like this, like people like, someone makes like the minimum, like something that could sound as patriarchal and then it gets crucified, and it's another extreme, like it's very sad because today, like for example, like many men who go through this kind of revolution, like they become sometimes feminized, they can spiritualize but more feminine, and they lose their balls, so to speak. I remember with a friend of mine in California, when we realized that in the spiritual culture, especially Buddhist culture, very equanimous, but there was like a lack of energy. When I arrived to CIS as a student in 1993, some of the girls there were saying like, we're glad you're here, you come from Spain, because all the men here, they have no initiative, they never hit on us. I mean, they're great, they're very sensitive, but they're boring. We just want guys who, and of course the key is like how to integrate, how to go through that revolution, how to really like don't be patriarchal, cultivate different kinds of relationships without losing your balls in the sense in the case of men, like I had this idea I would write a book called Buddhism with Balls. We didn't do it at the end. We didn't want to be disrespectful, of course, but there was something to it in a fun way, I think I don't know if I went to different directions that you asked, but I could talk more and more about this,
That resonates. So I like kind of even going back a little bit to what you were speaking about before of transcending identity, transcending these identifiers. Like you don't even need, you don't. It sounded to me like you were saying you don't even need the identity of monogamy necessarily, but it's about, but that's just a helpful. That's a helpful concept to package what is being spoken about and what is being communicated. And so I resonate with this moving beyond, as transpersonal as we are in this field. This transpersonal is to move beyond that personal, that ego, the personas, the many masks that we put on. And it seems that in a lot of the ways that the traditional relationship functions is that people get into monogamous relationships and have to pick up masks that they have never worn before.
Right.
And they put on these masks that they have never worn before, and now they are losing aspects of themselves that I had spoken to a colleague we were speaking about say for 20 years of your life you are single and you are figuring out your relationships and who you're attracted to and all of these things and what attracts you in general, but then you get into this relationship and you have to let go of all of that interest. All of your interest in anything else. Now it has to be that one person. And if not, you're in the doghouse. And if not, then you've now ashamed them and yourself, and you're no good. You're a bad human for all of this, and it just explodes on you.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's very tragic, because in a way, by doing that, we're kind of like we're like putting big obstacles for the emergence and wider presence of embodied love in life, in the world. And I think that's one of the steps towards like making this world a more embodied heaven, it's very interesting, like if you realize, like in order to be touched in this culture, right? Either you have a lover or you have to pay for massage. What the fuck? I mean, really, if you look at it, it's like really crazy, right? Of course, you hug, I'm very physical, I have a lot of physical connection. And, people like us, we develop like cuddling friends. We're creating this culture, we're expanding this culture, but mainstream culture, that's the alternative, you are married, you have a lover, or you pay for massage. And that's horrible, because we need that nurturance. No wonder so many billions of people are kind of hook up with pornography and the internet. The statistics are mind-blowing. I give talks on this, on the shadow of sexuality, and the statistics of Pornhub and things like that are mind-blowing, right? And I think it speaks to that, the lack of nurturance of eroticism. You have exiled eros from everyday life, and also physical contact is very important, So it's very sad when I think times are changing, and more couples, when they get together, even monogamously, they have kind of the spaciousness, the emotional intelligence, the trust, to allow their partners to still keep their friends and its physical connection with them. I think that is happening more and more, especially in our culture, more spiritual circles and stuff, but it's still in the mainstream culture, that's not the case, So it's very, very tragic. It's called in the literature, it's called the phenomenon of dyadic withdrawal. That's how it's a term, where a couple come together and they withdraw themselves, they start cutting friendships. Of course, the guy is uncomfortable with the male friendships of her. She's uncomfortable with them. And then the other thing that happens too, that's even more crazy, is that they cannot make new friends of the opposite gender, especially if they're attractive, or they cannot spend time with them by themselves. It's like totally crazy. Of course, I'm talking in more mainstream, many more people today are changing these chips, but still they're very prevalent.
And it's not really the fault of it. Like it's not the fault of one person that it is so crazy, but it is a culturally conditioned idea that it's a paradigm shift that really is tough to it's tough to transcend those conventional paradigms.
Yes. It's structural, it's deeply internalized, like for centuries and centuries, but also there's like social pressure and coercion. For example, I have a friend who is together with a new partner. She's a female. The new partner has different female connections. She's like, okay. And then her female friends are like, what? Are you crazy? There's a chance that it's going to end up cheating on you. You need to put limits on that. And it's the other way around. I think the more limits to put on people, the more rebelliousness, the more, suffocated will feel, and they will need maybe to break out of that suffocation in a way that is impulsive and not constructive and painful and like cheating, in a bad way,
Yeah. So you experience that example is she's experiencing shame from her friendship circle, and just because she is loving freely the way that this relationship came into her life. And it is very fascinating to me that all of this is integrated. The participatory, it's like I guess a part of my question right now is, what kind of qualities does a person need to have to be able to communicate in this way with partners, with people? I have experienced you as very charismatic. Like you have a really great aura about you, and I believe that a lot of that is coming from this participatory deep dive inquiry, this deep dive inquiry into yourself and these questions of how you're relating to others and people of all walks of life would benefit from doing those kind of deep dive inquiries. But what kind of qualities does a person need to have to be able to operate successfully in this way?
I'm going there, but allow me a brief excursus that I think is also important. Like you say that you experienced me as charismatic, and I appreciate your mirroring. And I would say, like, very, very strongly, like, charisma is a human right. It's a human birthright. We all human beings have our own charisma, and I think charisma is like, especially when you understand charisma from a deeply psychospiritual perspective, I would say that it's like to really be in contact with, it connects with what you're saying, with your inner resources, like life energy, vitality, that kind of energy, and then to use that energy not to power over, dominate, but to empower the charisma of others, to empower those resources in other people, and I think that that's what best teachers do in their classrooms, like their charisma or whatever experience is like at service of students, like stepping in there, But anyway, about your question, like qualities, I don't have any kind of like from the heart, like 3 or 4 key, but what I would say, of course, in addition to the typical candidates, like emotional intelligence, of course, like capability to listen, capability to separate the present from the past, crucial, right? A lot of the loops and challenges and difficulties of couples is because someone said something that triggered something by resonance of the past of the other person that was painful, and the person projects that in the present situation. That capability to separate the present from the past, I think, is very, very important. And then I think also very important to really understand a relationship as a psychospiritual container, as a tool for psychospiritual growth of everybody involved. If you don't have that, it's going to be hard to not get loose in some of the loops. When you have that aspiration for both of you, then you are going to be much more receptive to criticism, to really look inside, to difficult mirroring, because you are there for growth, and also you're devoted to the growth of your partner, I think, like, from a psychospiritual perspective, a relationship is a structure that serves as a platform, for that individuation of each person, in addition to being an structure for the healing, sexual, emotional healing of both people, and also a structure to learn and receive embodied love in many different ways. So if you have like that understanding, that helps too a lot. And of course, there are many other skills that people learn in couple therapy. I see clients as well. They come to me, and sometimes I teach them schools about how to repair work, when someone was wounded, like betrayed, there's like some works you can do there, to help you. You probably are familiar with them. Are you a therapist as well?
Yeah, I am. So my master's degree is counseling psychology,
okay.
and
so you know what I'm talking about.
I'm on the LMFT track. I'm about halfway through my hours in the state of California, because to be a really great professional, I think that you have to have some sort of private practice where you are working, the workshops, the facilitation of spaces where people are learning and all of that, but then also your own research interests. I think that that's really how this professional transpersonal psychologist. I think that's or professional transpersonalist. That's what that looks like.
But if you allow me, hold on. If you allow me a second, because I forgot something really important. Just very briefly, is the area of sexuality. In terms of because that's the Achilles heel of most monogamous relationships. Once they spend like a number of years together, sexuality is not what it used to be, and then passive aggression start kicking in, and then couple therapy, and then people start seeing more attractive other people, and finally one of them cheat unless they open the relationship. And this is the everyday life for millions of couples today. That's that thing. So I think two key things here is like to really like for couples to really like work with their sexuality in different ways, exploring, for example, transorgasmic sexuality. That can help a lot to minimize sexual habituation. That's one exploration, and of course the other exploration is to open the relationship. And of course, here's like the jealousy piece. I would say that regardless your preferential relational style, monogamous or poly, to work on the jealousy is very important. And in the book, like I offer some exercises, based on the Buddhist contemplative tradition that I felt they are effective, like to transform jealousy and into compassion, into empathic love, and I think that's very important because even many monogamous people, some of them, they are in a monogamous structure because they would not be able to tolerate their partner to be with others, even if they want to be with others. And then the people get stuck there. You see, there are so many things that working on jealousy would open up, and people have different conversations. And that's not to say that if you overcome jealousy, you are going to become or one polyamory, not at all. I think all options are equally valid, but you live also monogamy with greater spaciousness as well.
Yeah, so I like this. I think that your something that kind of ties all of this together a bit, and into my another question is that your reflection and your example as fully and freely expressed self gives other people permission to do the same. And that's sort of a little bit of where you went with the charisma, is that charisma is it's an innate value in everyone, and my charisma does not take away from somebody else being charismatic, and my example of being freely expressed in my life does not take away from this other person. And in fact, the healthy way is that it invites this person to also rise in their way, to develop themselves, to be fully expressed. And that's what we want. As transpersonalists, we are looking for the transformation in others. What is that transformation? It's the actualization of their potentialities, and what better way to do that, or what better way to show somebody that they have the permission to than by being the example yourself. That's really great. Are there ways of being that are like these qualities, or ways of being that are more effective as spiritual pragmatism? Are there ways for a female to be in a relationship that is different than a way that a man should be in a relationship? These concepts of the divine masculinity and the divine femininity, that we have both of those principles within ourselves, all of us, and these dynamics are we are seeing them in the world all the time. There is the feminine of the mystery, and then there's the kind of the masculine of the execution of bringing out of the mystery this birthing of new object and idea.
Yes, it's tricky. Like, no, I totally get where you're coming from, and it's tricky in terms like you probably are familiar with, like, if you study like different cultures cross-culturally, like the understandings of the feminine and masculine are sometimes opposites. Like Shiva and Shakti and Yin and Yang. Like in the Hindu tradition, Shiva is the active. Shiva is kind of like the presence, immutable presence. In the Yin Yang is the other way around, right? The Yang is like the one that is making the movement, and the feminine is like just holding everything, So, and of course, like today, like because also that whole transgender critique of gender, like we need to be super careful. That's why we say quotation marks when I use those terms. Still, I think there is some validity to talk about those terms in our culture, in different conversations. My sense, like, it's like, yeah, there is I don't know, we call them masculine or feminine but there are like different two types of energy within ourselves, like more centripetal to war inside, more centrifugal, like materializing action, right? And there is like just inward, like and they manifest at all levels, like physically, like resting action, sexually, like receiving, fully surrendering to sexual pleasure versus like going for it, like with action, like emotionally too, of course, expressing and receiving emotions, of course, like talking and listening, but also spiritually, like mindfulness, receptive practices versus like prayer, or practices that are like more, so I see that. So yeah, for me, when people also like put the gender to the different levels, I get a little, because I think I see all those forces going all the way through our humanness, and also all the way through, as you were pointing out, the divine mystery. And what's there, it's the androgynous, or it's like it's all together and transcending. Is transgender the new mystery? I mean, who knows, but it's an exciting inquiry. We had in Barcelona like a whole panel of transpersonal psychology and non-binary identities, and we explored all that with 3 other people. It was very exciting. There's a lot of there to inquire together.
That's awesome. So I guess further into this inquiry is like, is in a traditional relationship that is a man and a woman. I think most of the listeners, or most of the people, most people in the world, as we know, are in traditional monogamous relationships as the general dynamic that is around the world. So in those dynamics, is there is that masculinity, is there a part to play that masculinity plays that the feminine does not, and then vice versa? Are those important dynamics? Sometimes a female may be judged for being too masculine, like her ambitions and her professional prowess and interests in being an entrepreneur and making money on her own is frowned upon, or it's put off by the masculine for like an inferiority complex of some sort. But is it important that those dynamics are balanced in a relationship? Can they both be there in their fullest expression all the time?
Okay, I would say like yes, and the important is like to look at each relationship individually, case by case, right? Yep. Because any kind of generic statement around that is tricky, because people are coming from different places. Some people are maybe finding this guy who's coming from a very alpha male, strong, and then he really is beneficial for him to embrace more feminine values, quotation marks, and or not. He's coming from a totally different place. Some couples, maybe they achieve to dance between the gender and masculine and feminine within themselves, between themselves. I would say that sexually, that's a really good thing, actually. Sexually speaking, I can see a lot of value there, because, there is more diversity. You can allow yourself to be possessed, regardless of your gender, possessing someone, not in an emotional, controlling way, but in the instinctual codes of the instinct, that's very important there, like in the animal realm, So, and at the same time, for other couples, they may find an equilibrium in a different place, I come back again, whatever works, but at the same time, it's good that people don't get stuck. If people are growing, if people take a relationship as a platform for psychospiritual growth, that equilibrium will be changing, will be dynamic all their lives, And I think that's the path for most people, probably, Makes sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That life is an ongoing inquiry in yourself and in your relationships, and you don't want it to be a lake with no waves. You don't want life to be this still glassy lake. You want it to be the ocean. You want it to be this dramatic ups and downs and an adventure. And I love how people might take different looks at your work and see them as very different things. They might see that initially on the surface as very different things, but it's all weaved together. Exactly. I totally how that's all
Exactly.
weaved together.
Yeah, I would say like if you allow me, like I would say that one common denominator in the relationship work, love and freedom, and my transpersonal spiritual work is this stance of what they call critical pluralism. In which like it's like an impulse towards like legitimizing the greater diversity of relational or spiritual options possible in their own terms, while at the same time keeping grounds for constructive criticisms, like that is normally more contextualized and sometimes more generic, like, for example, I would be critical for any kind of violence in intimate relationships. Like I think that's unacceptable. And I think that we should be very strongly critical of that. So no, and also no all people hold relationships the same way. For some people, monogamy or polyamory, they can live it in higher, lower frequencies with more or less integrity, with more or less mindfulness of social privilege, with more or less honesty, right? So it's not one is better than the other. It's depending on how you live it, what cuts the cuts the fish here.
Right. Yeah. And it's so important for, I'm a man. And so I can speak for men in this way, but it's like, it's so important for men to be clear in the ways that they are communicating in their relationships, having just human beings. I take the man out of that actually, because human beings need to be clear about just having some clarity that comes from deep inquiry. It comes from deep inquiry into yourself and what you want and what you are able to see is potential exploration and potential growth, potential. These are the ways that I get out of my stuckness in life, and so that I can continue to grow and have this great symphony of a life in the end.
It's totally agree, and I would stress, yes, deep inquiry, but just in case, like some people think, oh, they are thinking about deep inquiry, like going inward with meditation and plans, and that's part of it, psychotherapy. But deep inquiry into relationship by force needs to be lived relational inquiry. You inquire, being in relationships with people, mindfully, and that doesn't mean that you're, being an utilitarian of relationship for your own growth. I mean, there's a distortion of that. But to really go into the sense of adventure with this person and this open inquiry about who we are, how we love, where we're going. I mean, it's really beautiful and opening, versus like the relationship escalator, as it's called. Oh, now we're boyfriend, now we're engaged, now we're married and have kids, and then what? And that's fine. And for many people could be the path, and people want that. And I understand. I'm super respectful, and I'm a big admirer for parents. I didn't feel that call. And conscious parenting for me is one of the most amazing spiritual paths that are people engaging and more challenging. So, but at the same time, it's like, so all these connections, between the transpersonal and relational work, legitimizing the greater diversity of options, but at the same time, like, let's be discerning, like, and at the same time, also like different relationship styles would be good or better for different people. Like, imagine, for example, like a woman who has been for most of her life controlled by a very jealous partner, and maybe even abused, For this woman, encountering polyamory could be tremendously emancipatory. But maybe for another woman who was sexually abused by her father or incest, going into polyamory would be re-traumatizing to create too many things, and she might need the container of monogamy to heal. And so it really depends, That's why I'm always stressing this when my proposal is not about enthroning in a monogamy, like being transgender is not better or worse than being male or female. It's just different.
I mean, you're brilliant in recognizing that, and the if I say things like men should be this way, that's not every man, that's not every woman, that's not every identifier, that's not every person, that's not every human being. different people have different strengths, different weaknesses, different areas of growth, different traumas, different experiences that will all come together in this beautiful song through like just exploration across your life in all of your relationships and yourself. What do you think is a last bit that you would want to for people to know about transforming themselves to be maybe more free in their life? What does somebody do if they are stuck? What do they do to embrace their love and freedom?
Yeah, it's a tricky question as well, because again, like depending on the person and where they are they with a partner in a monogamous container and the one exploring, is very tricky, because you need to be not only, this is important too, is I also write about this in the book. It's also important not to enthrone freedom as the ultimate value, because people can like, oh, freedom is ultimate value. I start like acting recklessly and caringly and without compassion for other people, you know, because freedom is like and then you need to accept freedom, like look for freedom, but with a greater ecological mindfulness of how the impact of your actions hit on other people. But that said, I would say to those people who are stuck, it's like, live your truth, you know, live your truth, live those impulses with as much mindfulness and care as you're able, you know. And if you are wrong or if that's not your path, life is going to tell you. Life is going to tell you. But if that's your path, and life is going to tell you too, and you're going to be opening grounds for you to live a much happier and fulfilling life. And also perhaps you are even opening grounds for the creative mystery to manifest through you in a very unique way. And it's going to be quite an interesting feast.
Right. Yeah. Live your truth. And you, there's so much stuckness in the attempt to live our truth, because we get so concerned about the eyes around us, the onlookers, and how we will be judged or shamed by our truth, whatever that might be. And sometimes you're shamed by the truth that you're living in your closest relationships, your parents, your family, your surrounding family, and your intimate partners and close friends and things like this. But living your truth, the world will tell you if the world will tell you if you're going in the right path or not.
But that's also what you say is very important. I know we need to close soon, but it's very important, because that's why we need sometimes the sangha, you know, the group, the greenhouse, the workshop, where we can experiment with those things in a very safe container. And in the greenhouse, we make it strong. So when we express it in the world, you know, it has already rooted, has had the support of a social group, you know, a small group supporting you. That's very important. Otherwise, you can hurt yourself, you know, as you mentioned, you can really it can backfire and become even like more. Right. So yeah, and of course the professional support of transpersonal counselors, such as yourself, you know, like or like people who really understand this process and can really support you like step by step there, you know. So
conscious discernment is all a part of the process as well. And so you could harm yourself, you could harm others, and it is not fair to harm others or yourself in making freedom your highest value, you know.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you so much. I cherish the archiving of this conversation with you, Jorge. I really value you as a colleague, as another, you know, tribesman in this field of transpersonal psychology, this fellow explorer, fellow inquirer. You know, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was been such a rare pleasure to have this conversation, like this dialogue, that I really enjoy much more than talks or normal interviews. You know, as we were talking, like so much more fun. And yeah, may this conversation is of assistance to many people in your audience. You know, may help others. You know, like how do you say, like in the Buddhist tradition, like offer the merit of this conversation to others and all sentient beings and all that. It's always important. But thank you so much. You were great. I felt so at home here talking with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that this continues to help transpersonal scholars moving forward in any courses I teach. I'm gonna point them in this direction. So,
Wonderful.
thank you so very much, Jorge. Once again, I appreciate it. What a wonderful conversation to have published on Valentine's Day. If you're doing any kind of deep relational inquiry, you have to check out his book, Love and Freedom, Transcending Monogamy and Polyamory. And if you are a transpersonal psychologist, you have to check out Participation and the Mystery. These are essays on transpersonal psychology, the participation theory, and critiques. He is an amazing scholar, as you have just seen. So comment, like, share, subscribe. Share this with your tribe. Share this with your community where you are safe to deeply inquire into the fullest expression of yourself. And happy Valentine's Day.